It's preparing to live stream. All right, it's preparing to live stream. We're live on YouTube.
All right.
Wonderful. So, all right, I'm excited about this. So I'll just start the live stream on Instagram, and then as soon as you see it, just click on the button.
Okay, cool.
There.
All right, I got you. Okay.
Hello, hello. Thanks for joining. Hola, hola a todos. Hello, Carito. ¿Cómo estás en Buenos Aires? Hello, Florida. How you doing? Right. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to do a little intro before Stephen joins. There's Stephen. Hello, brother. Right. So I'm going to do a little introduction first. So first of all, thank you all for joining. I see there's already 135 people connected on the live. Thank you so much for joining. So this is the second episode of this food talk show, kind of a new format that I'm really enjoying to share with you all. And the idea is that I bring some of the most inspiring folks that I have come across in my career, kind of at the convergence between food and sustainability and art and media and all kinds of different aspects of food. Food is not only cooking, right? Food is not only restaurants. There's so much more to it. And I want you to see a little bit of the most incredible folks that I've met. And Stephen is one of them. And I'm super excited to be welcoming him to the show. And let's bring in Stephen. So I met Stephen, I think, about 2 years ago in Los Angeles. A dear common friend invited us. Hey, there we are. Hello, Stephen.
What's up?
Good to see you.
You too, my man.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna connect my headphones. Having a little glitch here. I think. All right. Just a second, I'm gonna connect my headphones so I can hear you well. There we go.
All right.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So how are you doing? You're in Atlanta, right? How's everything going over there?
As well as we could hope for, I guess, in the moment. The streets are less and less crowded by the day. And I have the good fortune of being close to a large park here in the city. So when I can, I get walks outside. So not so bad.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's incredible how kind of in close spaces with light, how nice it is when you have actually the freedom to be in touch, even with sort of marketry, a bit of bring, yeah, things that we miss become more important, right? In these cases.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, well, I'm excited to go on a deep dive in your journey and kind of really understand a bit more. We've had a few kind of meetings at a time, but now we get to kind of really go a bit deeper here. And it's great that we have this technology to be able to do it publicly, right? In a way, that's part of the magic of the moment is that we're rediscovering how to use all these technologies and leverage them for communicating ideas. So we're going to start with the question I found on your bio that you have on Whetstone Magazine, that you are a sommelier in recovery. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
That's true. So what's up, everybody? I'm Steven Satterfield, and it's true. So before my career in media as a publisher, I came from the restaurant industry, and I came from the wine component, or the wine sector in particular. So I worked as a sommelier. I became a sommelier when I was very young, at age 20. I started to take my first sommelier exams. So it's always been a part of my adult life. And the reason that I say I'm in recovery, because I feel like, unlike a chef or a baker, when you leave the kitchen, you can still be a chef, but I don't think we have the proper nomenclature for what do you call a sommelier who no longer works on the floor.
Right.
Because
wine lover, I don't know, exactly. Wine experts.
It seems inadequate. So yeah, that's why I've just taken to calling myself a sommelier in recovery.
And why did you choose wine in the first place? Like, what got you into the world of wine?
When I was young, I had a really close friend whose father was very much into wine, a man that I very much respected as a teenager. And when we would go over to their house for dinner, there would always be wine on the table, but I was very interested in his process for selecting the wine. He always wanted to know what we wanted for dinner first, and then it would set off a chain of events that will culminate with him in his wine cellar for like 10 or 15 minutes. And I really wanted to know what he was doing down there. I wanted to know what he saw and what he was considering. And I started to look at wine as sort of like its own language, really. And basically from that moment as a teenager, I decided that it was something that I wanted in my life forever, and it's always been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll just add a little more to that, just in terms of like a prevailing worldview which has followed me, which has definitely come from the wine industry. And I see you with the old grapevine there too, so this is very on brand. But basically, in wine, it's all about terroir. It's all about provenance. It's all about understanding the wine through the lens of history and process and where it's come from. And I think that same framework and that same ideology, as someone who is really engaged in many different facets of life, really, I felt became a unique way to view the world and experience the world, and starting to ask of things and of ideas, what are the origins of these ideas? What are the origins of these institutions, of these things? And so from that point of view, it's really informed, Whetstone and the work that I do now, kind of more centered on food anthropology.
Interesting. So you got a lens to food culture, to food stories with wine that got you into kind of this fascinating world. It's interesting because wine is one of the most ancient intoxicants, right? Like maybe 3,000, 4,000 years ago, humans started fermenting, right? As a way to preserve foods. But fermentation might have started, in general, started millions of years ago, just ripe fruit falling from the tree, the sugars are there, and the yeasts are there, and it starts kind of becoming alcohol, which is a very natural process. And maybe we used to get drunk on rotten fruit a long time ago, and then we developed this passion for wine, which in ancient Greece was very kind of integral to the symposium, to the exchange of ideas. Always had wine, and there was this character actually, the mageiros, which was the person pouring water in the wine to make sure that some people get more drunk than others, and to kind of affect the conversation, which is in a way what the sommelier would do, in a kind of different way, because at that time the mageiros had power, right? It had the power of influencing the conversation according to the amount of water that would go in the wine. But always wine has been this almost, I'd say, like a lubricant for word, a lubricant for ideas, a lubricant for social exchange and connection, and also something that carries so many stories. So I'm glad that you kind of pointed at that, as you know, it's a big passion of mine. I actually have a nice bottle of wine here in front of me, and it's interesting because, you know, you were mentioning narratives and terroir stories. This, for example, you know, it's what it says on the brand, right? So it's organic, it's harvested by hand, vinified and created by the name of the person, right? So you have the name of the person, right? So you can almost find their address here, and there's transparency, there's a connection. There's of course Bordeaux, so I'm in Bordeaux. It's organic, so it's kind of so much information that comes with it, which the flavor ends up being almost something that just happens after all the rest. And we focus a lot on flavor, on the, you know, whatever kind of grade or appellation or origin, and we consume a lot of the story before we actually taste the molecules that are in the wine.
100%.
which relates to your kind of story, and that I've found fascinating, especially in your perspective, unique perspective on it, which is the way you've been foraging origins, right, with Whetstone, with the magazine. Do you want to tell us a bit more about Whetstone? Why Whetstone in the first place?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, a whetstone is a sharpening stone, and it is used in cooking to sharpen the blade before you begin to cut your vegetables. So basically, you know, it's like a flat stone that you just kind of hone like this. And what it represents for me, honestly, is about ritual. It's about being committed to ritual, and it's about getting sharper. So it's almost in a literal sense of it. And I also like to think of it as kind of the step that happens before what everyone perceives to be the first step. And so what I mean by that is when you talk about, you know, what is the first thing that a chef does? You know, someone might say, oh, well, you got to do your mise en place, you have to do your prep, or they got to, you know, grab their knife bag. But really the first thing they have to do before they can do anything is they have to sharpen the blade. And it's a daily ritual and it's a daily practice, but it's not something that would be well understood if you weren't in the field of culinary art. So that's kind of the idea behind the name. And then, sorry, what was the next question?
No, I guess that was the question, was
okay,
like, where we come from, and I love the metaphor of sharpening, because we tend to go straight into the act, into the matter, forgetting in a way the foreplay that goes before, and really understanding the intellectual foreplay before we actually get to a recipe, to a plating, to you know, creating something beautiful, an artistic even experience. There's so much that goes before this foreplay of research, of foraging, why we're actually doing it. Where does this thing come from? Why am I doing it in the first place? All of these questions that I feel we don't ask ourselves enough in every craft, but I would say in food, it definitely happens a lot. And so I love, and it's definitely been like that. I have only one of the physical Whetstone magazines of my own, but it's definitely sharpened a lot, and it made me question things that I've never thought of before. which I guess is
So,
what you want to create in the
exactly.
people who read your words and your work.
Exactly.
Right. So why so Whetstone is out. How many have you published? How many printed copies, and what's kind of what's
Yeah.
happening?
We've published 5. We just published our 5th one in January of this year. And we are already working on our 6th edition, which will be out um, later this year. So, I think I'm just reflecting on, what you're saying is kind of like intellectual and creative foreplay before, artists move to their medium or to the craft. And I think, for people who are deeply engaged in their craft, there is a silent, almost ritualistic moment, before they really engage in the work, that is about grounding. So whether it's about, grabbing a board or cleaning something or sharpening something, or a mental exercise, or if you're an athlete, perhaps it's stretching. But I do find that in craft, there is always a kind of moment of grounding, that I think is informed by tradition and by practice. So that it made me think of that. And then, as far as like our motivation to um, forage stories, we believe in story as kind of the most powerful teaching mechanism available to humans, because humans have always taught each other and one another in the form of story. And so when we look through things from a historical or anthropological lens, then what we're actually saying is that this is the way that humans have communicated ideas and information to each other from the beginning of time. So this is actually our collective common language. So we speak in story.
Speaking stories. That's absolutely. And the stories and the narratives that we speak about now matter a lot, because there's this idea of protopia, right? We create the future that we can imagine. If
Mhm.
we don't imagine, if we don't talk about a more beautiful potential world, if we don't write about it, it's more unlikely that it would actually happen, and we just leave it to chance or to stronger forces or to kind of more unsolicited forces in a way. So this idea of writing story, we're actually writing future as well. And I want to, and there I really want to hear you share a little bit about what are these themes that you approach and in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the main themes that we explore is origin itself. So
Mm-hmm.
origin is a framework of understanding. So basically, you can't really understand anything without understanding where it's come from. And so by deepening our understanding of where things have come from or where they've originated, then
Mm-hmm.
we are able to bring ideas into, in our case, the world of food, that otherwise are locked out through a very common and limited framework of the way that other media entities talk about food, which is the best new chef, the best restaurants, the top 10 this or top
The
10 that.
most expensive and rare ingredient,
Exactly, exactly,
the most eccentric thing, yeah. And sometimes
exactly.
we lose focus. Absolutely. Hmm.
Exactly. So we are trying to provide, in a sense, like a correction for
Mm.
that discourse, and we focus on origin as a means of understanding, as a means of understanding humans, as a means of understanding culture. And in that work, that often leads us to work around indigeneity, indigenous foodways, indigenous food systems, because we're talking about First Nations people. So those are two of the themes that I think like front of mind, in terms of origin, which is the anthropological framework. But I think our underlying belief in all of this is that food has the power to expand our collective empathy. And what I mean by that is, you know, food is the only way that we can all understand the shared experience of humanity outside of just the fact that we all have to breathe, right? We all have to eat. And there's not really parts of our human experience anymore that really truly connect us. In fact, we're feeling that now in this moment more than we ever have in our lifetimes. And I think that is the optimism that I'm holding in this moment is the optimism around empathy and the capacity for an expansion of empathy, because we are now in a circumstance that demands it. And we're actually seeing food and food systems being created in real times in the name of empathy, in the name of helping our neighbors. And I'm really hoping that we remember this feeling and can continue the feeling once this has passed.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for that reflection. It's really to kind of go beyond what we've been told is food, and really kind of put it back at the center, because it is. I'm thinking about my own origins, right, in the craft, which where I want to study cooking because it is a universal language, right? Right now we have. I'm just watching a little bit the people that are here. We have lots of people from Turkey. Hello, everyone from Turkey, and South America, and you know, every one of us, we might not speak the same language. We might be from completely different landscapes, culturally speaking, and kind of environmentally speaking. But at the same time, we can all agree on what's good. And there is, of course, differences, right? Individual, cultural, learned differences. But at the very core, we're all human. And something that tastes sweet, honey will taste good anywhere, right? Honey will be revered as something beautiful anywhere, just like water, and clean water in particular, right? So there's this universality that is transversal to all of us. There's people from the Philippines here, I see as well. And in this diversity, I think is really the beauty and the power of the future of food, because I feel that we're really still, and you know, I don't talk much about this, and I haven't talked about this on Instagram much, but it's something that's very close to my heart. And because I know we've had this conversation in the past, Stephen, but a show like The Final Table, for instance, did a very great job. Like, it's an amazing competition. It was the grandest, probably, in terms of production, in terms of quality of ingredients, in terms of the feat of bringing, you know, chefs from all over the world, doing like a broad worldwide, worldwide, not so wide, but let's say global kind of call for talent, right? But at the same time, it was not representative of the world's cultures. It was not representative of all the worlds. In the way we were serving plates. I remember once with Rodrigo, we challenged back behind the scenes, we challenged, and we didn't want to use a plate for the India challenge. We wanted to serve on a banana leaf. And they were like, nope, it needs to be on a plate. I was like, but why? But like, you know, like, why a plate? And we're always the team doing this, right? And like, oh, again, Charles and Rodrigo want to do like something that's completely out. But the point is that we live in a very much, I would say, Eurocentric approach to what good food is. And in that sense, I would very deeply linked with colonization. Just like we see the culture of Britain, let's say, through the Commonwealth, and kind of, you know, how the colonization happened in that kind of part, but also the Spanish, and then how they colonized, or the Portuguese, how they colonized Latin America, and how the culture of eating was exported everywhere in the world, right? And the African continent, in different parts, different European influences led to different languages, led to different ways of connecting to food. And very much the standard narrative, the international narrative, is heavily Eurocentric. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's a beautiful thing, and there's beautiful tradition, but moving forward, we need to have more diverse perspectives on what actually global/human food is. Because otherwise we are just perpetuating one way of seeing things, which might not be the right way. And it's also very deeply connected with the fossil fuel industry, thinking of how we actually managed to colonize, and also of market forces. Like, you know, maybe in the 1800s in Paris, we were having these beautiful desserts, right? And there's like little pastries, and Antonin Carême, one of the fathers of modern pastry, one of the first artists really in food, was building these things with sugar, and that sugar was harvested by slaves, right? And so that sugar was highly unethical, right? And the birth of modern pastry was based on a trade that included slaves, included thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people suffering, and living in injustice. And that's kind of, you know, it's something that I like reminding to my students, is like, hey, remember this. You know, sometimes we tend to forget what was all this the slave trade all about, and this kind of triangle of commerce. It was all about sugar and about cotton, what we eat, and how we and our clothes, right? How we dress and how we eat, which is still very much at the core of the main kind of injustices in the world and the things that are not working well and that we need to change. So, with that said, I want to put it back to you, into asking you, what do you consider to be kind of the injustices in this world when it comes to food, like connected to food, but everything is connected to food at some point, right?
Yeah, of course, of course. I'm just listening to you preach, like I'm nodding my head. Yep, yep, yep. You know, what are the injustices in food? The injustices in food are the same as the injustices outside of food. And it's a really important thing for people to remember. And it's especially important for people to remember when they say that food is not political. It is inherently political. And as you have very astutely and accurately tied it to, it is part of the history of colonization. You know, you mentioned textiles, but also in South Carolina, rice was really the preeminent wealth builder of South Carolina, and in fact of our nation. You know, by way of the 13 colonies. So, I don't think that it's possible to divorce food from either a historical relationship to people suffering, or unfortunately, a relationship to people suffering in this moment. And if we're paying attention, the news is available to us. For instance, this morning, there is news about a worker at a chicken processing facility who was ill, who had to go to work and has unfortunately now passed away. A couple months ago, there was another story about a chicken processing facility that had an ICE raid done. So because of and for our international viewers, basically that's an immigration enforcement came into this chicken processing facility, and they rounded up all of the workers there and took them away and literally put them in cages. But
Wow.
How do we get people to think about these stories in relationship to not ordering fast food? Or when we see that a stimulus package, you know, disproportionately benefits fast food companies who disproportionately, you know, perpetuate poor health outcomes, which is now disproportionately affecting African Americans and already vulnerable populations of people. So if we're willing to pay attention, we can see the ways in which food is inherently tied to all of the politics and all of the inequity that we see all over the world. And unfortunately, that is still the case today. And again, as you pointed out, our entire food system and the entire human story is built on this kind of exploitation. You know, at its core, all of the food that we eat is really just about the sum of a movement and a migration of people and plants. But the movement of people, it has not always been done forcibly and equally. So, and that is really what the tension has been, whether we're talking about slavery or whether we're talking about the workers who still face these injustices today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible how pervasive the power of food is, right? Because we talk here about the political and the economical kind of implications of food, and you may be eating even an organic chicken, right? Can be from a factory, and you're like, oh, I'm doing okay because I'm actually eating it, or it's organic, it's not too bad. And then there's immigrant workers that are being treated in certain ways, very much with the same unethical standards as what we had a few hundred years ago with the slave trade. Like in a sense, that we have people who are, not necessarily loving what they're doing, to say the least, and that is the food that we love.
Mhm.
Some of us, or because of the unconsciousness that comes with eating nowadays.
Mhm.
Consciousness, we can talk about what unconsciousness means or what consciousness means, and this is not the topic of this conversation, but really kind of asking and going beyond, right? Because at the same time that we know food has those aspects,
Mhm.
it also has the power to connect us. Like I see a comment here from Zero P that said, "Food during this time has brought me closer to my family and myself as a whole." And that he owes a lot of, a lot to chefs who kind of inspire in kind of in the craft, which is, this is from the extreme, right? Right now we're confined, so what's happening? Like, how do you see what's happening right now during this crisis with the food industry? What are the injustices that are emerging, but what are maybe eventually the opportunities that are emerging and that you see emerging during this time?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about the opportunities first. I think the biggest and clearest opportunity that I'm seeing right now is in CSAs. And so through
What is a
CSA,
CSA?
at CSA, yes, community supported agriculture.
Yes.
So basically, what that means is us as consumers, we can invest in our local food system by there's two different ways it usually works. One way is you pay at the beginning of the season a fixed amount of money that basically buys you some sort of equity in the yield or the harvest, or in some cases allows for you to take on some of the risk of the farmer in case nature happens. And
Absolutely.
then the other way that is probably more common now and definitely in light of where we are now is basically you can find a local farm in your city and you can pay a fixed amount of money every week. Usually it's around 30 US dollars, and they'll give you a box of whatever they've just harvested or whatever they've kind of corralled with their other farming partners or other people in their network. And not only are you going to get better food, but it's a radical political act for all of the reasons that we just discussed. And that is the part that I try to talk to my friends and family about. It's not just a matter of public health and personal health, which we take back our own agency and our health when we buy from local farms. But it's also a matter of keeping our money outside of this corporate industrialized food system that continues to do so much harm to the workers in factories, on farms, the amount of fuel, the fact that people in California are eating produce from New Zealand, like it's all very toxic. And I think that the CSA, which is really coming back into fashion in a crisis moment, I hope is something that stays with us and a radical opportunity to change the
Absolutely.
food system. And then the threats, which I think are just as great,
So
if not,
just to
yeah,
kind of transition before the threads, I think that
yeah,
there's something really interesting here. It's almost like we would do like a subscription model, like we pay for Netflix, right?
exactly.
And we find that very easy. We pay for internet, right? And we pay it forward, right? And paying it forward has two senses. One of them is that we're actually investing monthly our resources for a system, right?
Hmm.
Which doesn't happen with food. With food, we go to supermarkets and we get what we can most of the cases,
Hmm.
and what we can also in terms of how much we have, right? And we kind of get the best we can, and but that's not necessarily healthy for the system. So you're talking about a transition, a shift to a new type of economy when it
Hmm.
comes to food, and that we
Hmm.
have the power now to actually choose subscription model food, which actually could help the restaurants right now, because as we know, in many cities, the restaurants are, I mean, they have huge rents to pay because they have to be very well placed, and it's often real expensive real estate where restaurants are. And your success depends on how expensive your rent is sometimes, which is kind of a broken model in some ways. And so restaurants are surviving with subscription models, but also that you're saying that we could get our food paid in advance. And think about the depth of this. And I'm talking to the audience because I know, Stephen, that this is kind of central. Think about the depth, all of us, of paying it forward to the people that feed us. Think about the depth of investing in them to do the work that keeps us alive. Would you do that? Does that make any sense? Right? Is that better than having them basically slaves to a system that doesn't work on many levels, that is completely inefficient in terms of energy and of food waste, right? Humanity is wasting 45% of the food it produces. This is data from the United Nations. 45%. And a billion people, over 1,000 million humans, don't have access to nutritious food today, and we're throwing away 45% of what we produce. That's like right now, we even talk about it as like, oh wow, that's yeah. But in the future, like this is going to go down in history as one of the greatest mistakes of humans, one of the greatest mistakes of humankind. What I found fascinating is that you're proposing a solution that makes complete sense from an economical perspective, from a political perspective, and from even I'd say a spiritual perspective, because you're paying it forward. You're showing gratitude before you get your reward. And that just is I find that idea revolutionary, to be honest.
Yeah, and you're taking back power, right? Like we really see it in this crisis too, and I'm with you on all of it, you know, but like the feeling of going to a grocery store and seeing empty shelves in the United States was really jarring for a lot of people. You know, our exceptionalism and our ideas about the United States really didn't coincide with what the experience was at the grocery store for people here just a couple weeks ago. And it started to raise a lot of questions about how strong or secure our food system is here in the US. And while it's an inefficient system, it is a pretty secure system, meaning that we're probably not going to run out of food. But that fear and that panic that we all collectively felt was simply because we were not and are not in relationship to farmers. We're not in relationship to the people who feed us. And if we were in relationship to the people who fed us, number one, we would have never been in the grocery store having the panic moment. And number two, we would have known that all of our friends who are local farmers, they have tons and tons of food at their homes and on their farms. And so I think that part of the agency too, and supporting these models, and I know someone else in the comments said like farmers markets too, absolutely. If you're still able to shop at farmers markets, the political power still functions in the same way. Yeah, I really just, I think that like the ability to just have a peace of mind and have agency around our own food is something that we shouldn't take for granted, and why we see a lot of people now starting to plant gardens in their own homes and starting to think much differently about who provides our foods. Because when we leave that responsibility to a corporation, then we're exposing ourselves to really bad health outcomes and possibly worse. I don't trust corporations to keep me fed and healthy. And I don't think anyone else should either.
Yeah, there's a chance that that could change, but I'm definitely with you that instead of just leaving it to chance, which is what happens when you keep on, let's say, voting with your money for a system that is broken just because it works. And it gives us relatively cheap food, relatively, I mean, in absolute terms as well, because humans have never spent so little in their food in history, right? The amount of money that we spend today on food is much less. We're spending more on traveling, on rents, on stuff. But just a few generations ago, and our ancestors probably spent most of the resources eating, right? So there is a change, a positive, like in the grand scope of things. But we tend to be held by narratives, right? We go back to stories, we go back to the importance of media and the importance of the work that you do. And in a way that we're doing here, kind of sharing these ideas live as well, which is to really kind of think about the narratives that we tend to just eat like whole and take for granted, when really, if you really study, if you really question things, it is almost impossible that you don't change your way of consuming. And it's not easy because it's not seen as much, right? Because it's not advertised as much. So it seems that it's not there. But I would really invite everyone to just be like, the vote that I have in my pocket, my dollars, my pesos, my euros, this is the vote that I give every day to the world I want to build, right? And now everybody kind of look up CSA models, but also in anywhere in the world, like cooperative models, where we actually subscribe to farmers and support farmers in advance of whatever they're going to be able to harvest and send us home. That I think is really a powerful idea that hopefully can emerge from the current crisis, that we pay attention to these things a bit more.
I hope so, man. I hope so. And because let's talk about what happens if we don't do that, right? So we've just talked about a positive outcome. The other outcome is that corporations have even more control and influence over the food that we eat and drink. That in this moment, they consolidate power, and that an already industrialized, globalized food system says we have to come to the rescue, we have to feed the world. And because all of the independent and small farms weren't supported, and because they had to go out of business, and because they lost restaurants to sell to, it fundamentally shifted the entire supply chain of the US and of the world. And as a result of that, now corporations will fill in those vacuums. I do not want to live in a world where we come back and all that's open are Pizza Huts and McDonald's and other, and Subways. I don't want to be in a world where I can't be engaged in tracing the provenance of my food. I don't know where it's come from. I don't know anything about its origins. So I think, like, if you think that it is good to have knowledge of where your food comes from, if you think it's good to have agency just in being able to make that decision, right? Like, we should be applying political pressure even to McDonald's and fast food companies. We should know, like, down to the potato, where did this come from? This is not like a radical political ideology. This is pretty fundamental. Where does this food come from? And so if we if we cede more powers to our diet to corporations, then the implications for us will be even less transparency than we already have right now.
Yeah, and I thank you very much, because I hadn't been, I'm a positivist at heart, and I really kind of want to see the hope. I want to see, that we're able to take the good decisions and all that. But, it's a reality check to really think and really face the truth if we don't actually do what's necessary to shift. Because as you say, like, something scary that I learned not long ago, in Mexico, the curriculum for doctors is funded, the curriculum for studying medicine is funded by the meat industry, beef in particular. What does that mean? Is that we're going to invest more money, more resources into research that eventually validates the interests of a certain conglomerate of businesses and large-scale farmers. And that is, and there are farmers, and it's a big conversation. We talk about beef, the farmers, but then there's also these corporations that don't touch food at any point. They just kind of do the trade. And there's such a big risk that we actually disconnect from what it means to be human, or we actually choose a path that is going to be maybe working from an economical perspective, but that will be detrimental to us. And let's not forget what the real crisis is right now. I mean, we have a big crisis going on, and I don't want to put it down at any point. We're definitely going through something radically, transformational for history. But the great kind of crisis that is happening is the climate crisis right now in this century. We're talking about not only we're just one species on this planet. We're talking about the sixth mass extinction, and we're talking about our activity as humans affecting the life of many species around the world, which comes from a particular type of organization and food system that might be at the source of things like the current crisis, the current health crisis, right? So everything is interconnected, and that is maybe one of the things that we're learning with this current crisis. But the point is that let's not forget that there is one way in which we regenerate the planet, and there's one way in which we keep on extracting and taking from the planet without giving back, right? And it's the gray solution doesn't work either. It's either we become the architects of a beautiful world or the architects of a mass extinction. And that depends also on how we show up.
Exactly right, man. It's up to us. I completely agree. I think that, we have to take back power in our own communities, on our own blocks, on our own streets. We have to take care of our neighbors, the role of care. Food is care. It cannot be outsourced to corporations. We have the wealthiest person in the country.
So again, I lost you for a second.
Yeah, the wealthiest person in our country, Jeff Bezos, who is a billionaire, I don't even know how many, hundreds of times over, is forcing his workers to work in a pandemic, put their lives on the line without any paid sick leave or medical care. And we have to be really honest with ourselves about the ways in which we are complicit in perpetuating this kind of inequality and the privileges that we have, where even in a pandemic, some of us can just order food on Amazon, but some of those workers have to put their lives on the line to feed their families. That's not a system that I want to be a part of. And I don't mean that to shame anyone. Like, I've definitely bought stuff off of Amazon. I've bought microphones off Amazon. Like, this isn't like a purely moral conundrum for the rest of the world that I don't myself face. But especially as it relates to food, the idea that we would be enriching someone who can't even take care of his workers in a pandemic, whose wealth alone could provide healthcare for every single, and not only one of his employees, but for our entire country, and I don't feel good morally anymore. I can't rationalize that away anymore by saying, well, yeah, but I spend some money at other corporations. At some point, it's got to stop. And so I really, again, as a matter of a political act, the most radical thing any of us can do is to find out the people who are the closest to us in proximity, who are growing food, and we need to build a relationship with those people. We need to understand what are the challenges that you're facing as a farmer in this city, in this county, in this region. How can I support you? Where is your food going now? Because we're going to have to rebuild our food system. We're going to have to rebuild it. 40% of the food that comes from farms was going into restaurants. There's nowhere to go now. So how do we redirect that food system? And we see that the grocery stores, they don't know how to manage this new reality. They can't manage their inventories. They can't keep products on the shelves. So this is all happening in a very chaotic moment. This is happening in a crisis moment. And in crisis is when power shifts. And so it's an opportunity for people who share this worldview to also take power. But if we don't take power, corporations will take even more power from us, and we will be in an even bleaker position than we are now. And to your point, with the climate, like, more than anything, it will accelerate and exacerbate the climate crisis that we now face.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I really love, and I really think that the message is clear, loud and clear. Like take control, take power of how you consume and where it comes from and its origin, right? So when we talked about the theme of this talk show, food talk show, to be foraging origins, it is the work of a forager. It is a researcher. It requires effort. It requires knowledge. It requires courage. And in the word courage, the Latin root of the word courage is cor, which means heart, right? It requires the heart and the strength to just go and ask and go beyond. And it's not easy. So I think that's a beautiful note to kind of close this conversation that we're having. But I would love to give you kind of an ending kind of um, I don't know, message or whatever you want to say to the audience right now. I just want to also honor the attention of everybody. And, you know, I've been looking a bit of the messages here. A lot of people are resonating with what you're sharing, Stephen, what we're saying. And you're making a Southerner proud over there. Katie. Hello, Katie. Right. So, you know, I think these messages are important, and you know, right here, it's 100 and something of us present in this very particular second, and it's you know, put 100 people in a field, it's a crowd, like it's us, and if we're here hooked at this conversation, it's because together we can do something, right? It seems like nothing when we're just a number on a screen, but like these people together, and maybe 1,000 or 2 or 3,000 people will watch this. Like if you resonate with this conversation, what is it that we can do, right, to shift things? Because I'm pretty sure that each of us can influence at least 2 people in our lives, and that becomes exponential after that. So, and the power is definitely in our hands and in our voices. But we need to we need to go beyond, we need to forage these origins of our food. Stephen, please, you take it away.
Oh man, that's beautifully said. I think take care of your neighbors. You know, that's the main thing. Um, Power and government, in its best, is about care and providing care. And we can create our own form of governance that is rooted in love and care if we just take care of the people who are in our own proximity. So if you live in an apartment building and you know that your neighbor worked at a restaurant that isn't functioning right now, like leave some soup and a note, or bread and a note. You know, food banks are in a crisis moment all over the world, and especially in the US. If you're able to volunteer, they're going to have to start buying food pretty soon to fill the demand. So maybe you can donate food. There's so much that all of us can do if we begin to look at our existence as part of a collective responsibility of being a human and getting through this moment in a stronger, more sound place. So take care of your neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful message to end with. Thank you, Stephen. I hope we do this more, and I hope to be sharing some wine in the future together.
Yeah, I had to finish my coffee, but I'm gonna come join you now. It's morning here.
Right. So. Good. So thank you all for watching. This is really special, and I really appreciate you and your work, and I'm excited to see what you're going to come up with in the coming months and years, Stephen, because this narrative, and I always say it, is important. You're actually, you know, you're in my teachings and the courses that I give at the Institut Paul Bocuse. I talk about Whetstone, so you're making it, you know, it's a beautiful voice and message. And I always get inspired and learn from you. So thank you so much for that.
Very much the same, brother.
Yeah. So thank you all. And yeah, this will be 24 hours until it's gone. But then we're also recording it on YouTube. Go to my YouTube channel, and you can see also the one we did on Tuesday with Chris on gratitude and on food as connection. But this episode of Foraging Origins is also going to be there for you to see and share, and you know, spread the word. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Stephen. Bye bye.
Thanks. Peace.
Right. So let's go back to Zoom here. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm still with you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Amazing. So we had 2,000 people connect live.
Oh, that was awesome, man. That's so
yeah.
wild.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we're still live. I'm sure there's some people also. There's 4 people watching right now, the YouTube. Hey.
All right. What's up?
Oh, there's questions here that we didn't answer. Anyways, it was really amazing to do this conversation, Stephen, and I look forward for the next one. I actually need to run now because I have a meeting with beekeepers, 2 beekeepers. My father is a beekeeper as well, and we're actually figuring out a model in which we basically create some kind of co-op for beekeepers, where the beekeepers, it's actually quite hard right now to be a beekeeper and to make a living for the whole year, because you have a season, right? And you only have a season of 4 or 5 months. So often beekeepers don't manage to make a good living over the year. So we're trying to figure out a model where we can actually pay the honey that would be produced during the summer in advance to these beekeepers, who can focus on really caring for the bee in the spring, and also to eventually pay forward the 2021 production by giving them a small salary during the winter. So we're trying to figure the model out. Like, the conversation is happening just 20 meters and away from me.
Well, get to it and let me know what you come up with. You might be creating a whole new supply chain for honey.
Yeah, well, that too, and of course, when travel travel bans are over, I would love to host you here at home in Bordeaux.
100% there.
There's a lot here to explore.
Yeah, well, take care of yourself. It was really great to chat with you today, man.
Thank you. Let's connect.
Right.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Bye bye.